Um, Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's very exciting to see you all from all across the globe joining us, even if it's 7 a.m., 3 p.m., or 1 a.m. At night. So that's pretty exciting. Um, and I hope wherever you are staying safe and healthy. And we're very excited for this session here today with Alan Page, all about mindsets and skill sets and developers that can test. So I'm pretty confident this is going to be a very interesting discussion and even a debate, maybe. We'll see how things evolve. And before we get started, I'd just like to introduce Alan for if in case you don't know, but I'm sure everyone here is very familiar of Alan and know all of your great work. Um, Alan has been improving software quality since 1993. He is currently a senior director of engineering at Unity Technologies. Previously to joining Unity in 2017, Alan spent 22 years at Microsoft, which is a heck of a time. so that's very impressive. Maybe I guess you'll share more about that with us today. Alan was the lead author of the book How We Can Test Software at Microsoft, contributed chapters for Beautiful Testing and Experiences of Test Automation, case studies of software test automation. And his latest ebook is a collection of essays on test automation called The A Word, Under the Covers of Test Automation, and is available on LeanPub. Alan also writes a bunch of blogs. He has podcasts and shares very interesting tweets. So you should definitely all follow him over on social media and his blog. A lot of interesting insight over there. Um, so during this session, we'll have a bunch of time for discussion and questions answered by Alan. So please feel free to use the dedicated Q&A section in this Zoom session, and we will make sure to address as many questions during and at the end of the session. By the end, I guess we'll also open the stage for anyone who wants to ask their questions live. So I guess all you need to do is simply raise your hand. You have here this raise hand option. So feel free to do so, and we can just open your mic and open it for a live discussion. And of course, as usual with all our sessions, you will all receive a recording of this webinar by the end of the event and a really cool certificate of attendance. Um, and I guess I covered all the logistics. So I guess without further ado, Alan, the stage is yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Karen, and thanks Test Project for hosting this webinar. And thanks everyone for taking some time to hang out with me today. I see from the chat you're all over the world, and that's pretty cool. Let's get started. But I think it's important before I even start to maybe talk about a few elephants in the room going into this talk. Some of you may be here just because of my dog has decided to join the presentation. You may be here because you read the article I posted on the Test Project blog a few weeks ago. I wrote on a very similar topic. And in that article, or you may just know me, or you're just curious, or you get the mail from Test Project. Any of those are fine. Some of you, when I write about things like this, I get just as many people nodding their head thinking, yeah, those are good points. I want to hear more about that. I want to give some feedback. Or you may think I'm full of crap. That's fine. And maybe you're here because you want to shove a virtual pitchfork into my head. But I want to have those discussions because regardless of why you're here, whether we're one of those or somewhere in between, totally fine with me. My intent today, and with a lot of what I write and speak about, is because I do have strong opinions, which you'll know from Twitter or for any of the talks I've given, which those opinions, while at times they can sound controversial, I tend to talk about things I'm already seeing. And what I see working through colleagues in the industry, and especially what I've observed myself as I've navigated this world of software delivery since I first began it over 25 years ago. Even Brent and I in the A/B testing podcast, which I'm not afraid to plug here, the reason we started that podcast was to talk about the things we were already seeing in the industry and to try and give people who are confused, whether it's testers or developers, if they weren't quite sure what that meant to them, we wanted to help people navigate that. So while you may hear the ideas and go, oh, that's awful, that doesn't work, the things I'm talking about are not some aspirational things that I think we want to strive towards and change the way people work. No, I'm seeing some things work. I want to talk about what I'm seeing and why they're working for me or why I think they're working for others. But all that said, I'll put this caveat on. Whether you agree or disagree with points or entireties of what I say, one of the great things testers bring to the table is critical thinking and systems thinking and context. So I encourage you to apply critical thinking, apply systems thinking, add your context in order to internalize and reflect what it means for you. And then I also encourage you to apply that same critical thinking and reflection to what anyone in the industry who you take the time to watch their webinars, read their blogs, or interact with them in other ways and figure out how what they say applies to you. Disclaimer aside, a couple truths to be known, sorry. My fundamental truth. So my opinions today don't change the notion that skilled testing is critical for software delivery. I may make points that skilled testing can be done by people who don't have tester as their title. Testing is part of software development. It's not an afterthought like perhaps it was when I first started my career. Testing is not something you bolt on to the end of a product. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's worth calling out. The point, again, as I hinted at, where we may disagree or not, is that the people who develop software, I think, and I've seen, are capable of the vast majority of testing activities. You heard me mention critical thinking and systems thinking. I'm a big fan of the theory of constraints. You can read the book called The Goal, or the software version called The Phoenix Project, which says you look at a system and you mitigate the bottlenecks until they aren't bottlenecks anymore. I think The Goal is a better read for me because it is not about software, so we can abstract it and internalize and reflect on what that means for us, but it's something that systems thinkers, I think, should know about. Anyway, what I've seen, and I've come from test teams, large, dedicated, independent test teams. But the painful truth here is that the larger the separation between software development activities and software testing activities, the larger the delays you're going to see in the system. Back in the day, or maybe in today's world for some of you, where test teams and development teams are discrete, independent teams, the back and forth causes huge delays. I call it bug ping pong. Here's a bug. Actually, here's my code. Here's a bug. I fixed it. No, you didn't. Okay, now I did. Yeah, but now there's another bug. And that delay, of course, causes all kinds of problems in delivery. You multiply that across a large, complex project. Not to say that I think in a lot of teams, developers and testers are working pretty closely together and those delays are less. But even when you have a dedicated tester on a team, if the developer says, here's my code, I've tested it, I've done A, B, C, D, and E, and the tester goes, wow, now it's harder to find bugs. And maybe I can find there's some skilled testing, you can find some integration issues with other components, but we shouldn't have to find as testers those low-hanging fruit bugs. That's a smell for me on a team. But one other thing to call out is I see teams I see a lot of separate test automation teams, which I also disagree with. And you can read my latest article on TestProject for a longer explanation of that. But those things all cause delays. So with all that said, as Karen mentioned, it's not like I did not come from a deep testing background. I've written a lot about testing. I've spoken a lot about testing. I spent a big part of my career neck deep in dedicated testing roles. For better or for worse, I can tell you multiple projects at Microsoft where we tested quality in. As bad as that sounds, in hindsight, that's what we did. I've written a lot. I've been in that dedicated tester role, and I've moved on. But the main point, I'm not an outsider coming in. I'm again going back to my first thing I said. I want to tell you about what I've been seeing. So this is based on not just my time in test, but in the last 8 years or so of my career, I've not been in dedicated testing roles, and I've been but involved a lot in testing and quality. And what I've determined is that while I care about testing, I care much more, and in the last several years of my career, I've had much more influence over quality. I think, here's some fighting words. I think a lot of folks see testing and quality as perhaps synonymous, and they're not. I care much more about quality than I do about testing. All right, so let's go back in the time machine. I mentioned these last 8 years. Let's go back to 2014. I had just finished shipping Xbox One. In fact, we have someone here 1 a.m. in Australia. Xbox One shipped, and my family and I went to Australia for a month. It was wonderful. We went everywhere. I've seen more of Australia than a lot of Australians. And I came back and I began working on this science project at Microsoft. I call it a science project. I won't even go into the details, but I knew it would never ship, but it would give me a chance to work on some skills in Java and Linux that I wouldn't normally have an opportunity to do at Microsoft. This team, like a lot of teams at Microsoft at the time, were experimenting using far fewer, or in our case, not having any dedicated testers. Now, worth calling out, and don't freak out, I'm not telling you to get rid of your testers. Microsoft had some success in teams not having testers previously, the Bing team. And if you don't know Bing, Bing is a search engine like Google that Microsoft used to make, or maybe they still make. I don't know. I don't use it. On the Bing team, they didn't have any testers, and it took them, they had some pain points in getting there. And eventually they got very, very fast and could deploy thousands of times a day, had the right monitoring and alerts in place. It was the right thing for their velocity. There were other teams that attempted to copy this model and did not have a plan in place for how to ensure quality, or how to figure out that developers could own testing. Didn't go quite as well. But in our case, at least we had me and a few other former testers on the team. So I had some responsibilities for infrastructure and some data work. I was actually one of Microsoft's first managers of a data science team. I don't really know a lot about statistics and data science, but I learned quickly and I faked it until we could hire someone who knew more than me. But the main thing was I was in a role with my experience that I had a lot of freedom to do what I thought was necessary. So I recognized my privilege there. So I took on a role of as test coach, a lot through code reviews of looking at code that was being checked in and asking questions about test. I was surprised how quickly my code review comments went from where are the tests for this code to asking questions around specifics of the test. Like, this test seems too long. It's checking more than one thing. For any of you that have written automation, all the stuff you've learned in the beginning stages of automation, our experienced developers were going through. But within a month or maybe two, there were other people asking questions about test. There were questions around whether tests were the right test, if it was too complex, it was giving the right answer, if it was debuggable, if there was a failure, if the test had potential to be flaky, all the things that our more mature test automation teams get into, they got to very, very quickly. From there, I began to teach them some exploratory testing. Again, I was surprised how well they were able to pick things up. So even though I knew the project was never going to ship, I was pretty pleasantly surprised how well, and this is, remember, my first time on being on a team with no testers, but how well developers could learn how to test. Once that project died its expected death, I moved to another team at Microsoft, and this time I was hired specifically to be a test coach for a team of developers building a brand new project. They had a fair amount of test automation when I joined the team, but they needed help in actual testing because, as we know, a bunch of test automation definitely doesn't cover, like, you could have 100% code coverage and still have a product that customers don't like and they can't use. So I ended up actually doing more exploratory test coaching, or coaching on helping teams find bugs that they couldn't find through automation, getting them to think about some of the scenarios and edge cases that testers have, like I, in my career as a tester, had spent a bunch of time finding. And again, I was surprised, and especially on this team, that some of the developers were able to shift their mindset and their way of approaching testing to, like, I'll put it this way, some of these developers were better testers than most of the testers I had known throughout my career. And they learned it fairly quickly. And you could argue with whether they deeply learned it, or whether they knew the craft, but I can tell you they were finding bugs and thinking of testing ideas, which is what test design is, better and faster than most testers I had worked with. Not all. There are some testers who are still remain cream of the crop, but I, again, pleasantly surprised how well they picked it up. When I thought about this, and one thing I do a lot, and again, talking about what I'm seeing, is that reflection. In a way, I think they just needed permission to test. When you have these separate, discrete teams, developers think that testing isn't their job. Once you tell them they're accountable for it, and you tell them you don't tell them, oh, you can't do testing, it's somebody else's job. Once you say, no, you can do testing, you have permission to do it, and you're expected to do it, they kind of grow into the role pretty well, in my experience. So at that time, I began to share what I was seeing. I gave a couple talks, one called Testing Without Testers, a follow-up I gave this last year on Quality Without QA, a little play on that, but I had seen this work. And so the topic of today, of course, I've drifted a little bit into what I've seen developers do with learning testing, but that made me think more recently, maybe in the past couple of years, I began seeing statements like this in various flavors, that developers can't do testing, they don't have the right mindset, or there is a tester mindset and a developer mindset. And I got to tell you, back in the day, I talked about tester DNA all the time, and okay, testers just think a little bit differently. And from what I had seen, I looked at both my past, these statements around there's a tester mindset and developer mindset, and statements saying that's very, very difficult to change between the two, and making it sound like it was a Herculean task to change from the developer mindset to the tester mindset, made me think about at this point, dozens, or actually probably more like hundreds of developers that I had seen shift those mindsets seamlessly. I thought, cognitive dissonance was spinning. So, it reminded me of maybe a time 15, 20 years ago when Microsoft had moved to having pure SDET, software developer engineers and test, at the company. And I had folks tell me directly or indirectly at the time, this was a bad idea, because if testers who knew how to code wouldn't do as well as testing, or they couldn't be good testers because they were skewed by their knowledge of programming, they wouldn't think like the user. Well, I'll tell you, the only person that can think like the user is the user. So that argument does not hold up. But there's a parallel though, right? There that these testing and development are so distinct, and they're not. So the statement seemed wrong. And again, as I mentioned, I do a lot of reflection. I reflect on my cognitive dissonance. I understood in many ways why people would make that statement. Testing and development are definitely different skills, but the more I thought about it, they're highly intertwined. So I asked myself, as I'm asking you to ask yourself today, is it overly difficult to change from testing to development or creating to evaluating? Or does it just take some practice and some skills? So if you've ever seen a talk of mine before, it's virtually impossible for me to give a talk without mentioning books. So I thought about this mindset book, which I read. I don't remember when it came out. It feels like a long time ago, but I've lost all track of time over the last 12 months of COVID. But the book by Carol Dweck on mindset says that you either have a fixed mindset where you know what you know and that's it, or a growth mindset where you can adapt and change and grow, where you believe that the abilities you're born with or that you have are just a starting point for learning and advancing. I would guess absolutely everyone on this call feels like they have a growth mindset and not a fixed mindset because of the work we do. If you go back to all the way back to Peter Drucker, who pretty much any management statement made today has probably been made in one flavor by Peter Drucker. He talks about the knowledge worker, who does not produce anything that is effective by itself, but they produce ideas. They don't make a thing, they make knowledge, ideas, and information. There's a school of thought that testing is there to provide information. I believe it's there for a lot more, but that's what we do. We're knowledge workers. And knowledge workers, by definition, have a growth mindset because we have to think and adapt and learn. So testing and development are both part of this growth mindset, but they could be different skill sets within that growth mindset. And then if we think of the growth mindset, testing and development are learning about both is important. And learning in software or a learning organization is one of the most important things you can build. But it's all just knowledge work. For as long as I can remember, and there's a slight reputation for those that have followed about me, for those that have followed me on Twitter for a long time, is one of the ways to push my buttons on Twitter is to take something that is knowledge work, something that some example from the world that demonstrates the ability to learn and observe and say, oh my God, this is what testing is exactly. Because yes, you're right, but it's about knowledge work in general. Testing isn't the only creative learning adaptive activity available in the world. There are dozens and dozens of these. The canonical example, since I'm on the subject, is the video on inattentional blindness that shows the basketball players passing the ball around and the gorilla goes through. For a while, a long time ago, again, I've lost track of time, people all over the internet were telling me, not directly, that was all about testing. That's about knowledge work and observing and learning and thinking how to use our mind more effectively. So this idea of knowledge work leading into the growth mindset, again, part of my mass reflection. So only 20 minutes in or so, you get, let's ask this hard question. How hard is it to shift gears from creating to evaluating? And again, to remind you, I want to give you ideas to think about. If I can get nothing else out of this talk today, again, I'm not preaching to you. I'm not going to tell you a new way of doing things. I want to give you some things to reflect on. So there's a question to be answered, regardless of all that. How hard is it to shift gears from creating or building or developing to testing and evaluating? And is it a monumental task? Is it a hard task? Is it a small task? Is it something that everyone can get good at? So admittedly, I have anecdotes, which I will share, and my own experiences to reflect on, which I do a lot. So let's talk about that. And again, hopefully this triggers some things in you, some things you can reflect from your life. And we'll go through my thoughts and experiences because I've talked about what I've observed from other people doing and working with teams. I want to talk a little bit about my past, and hopefully that'll trigger some of your own experiences where you can, again, think about this and come to your own conclusion. So a super valid comparison is writing. I mentioned a few slides ago, and Karen mentioned that I've written some books and parts of books and articles and things. So I think there's a comparison we can make. So when writing, of course, I want to write something people care about and want to read. But there's a parallel to testing. Again, all metaphors break down in editing. And I think editing is a reasonable parallel or a metaphor for testing when you're writing. Having an editor is a great way to turn pretty good writing or even okay writing into great writing. I used an editor for some of my writing, but not all of it. So I got to think about what that means. I did some searching on the internet. Of course, I've written hundreds of blog posts and articles that did not have editing, and those are okay. But if I were to compare, I think it'd be fair to say that the writing that I've done that has been edited by a professional are better. Okay. And the internet, because I use it to search things, it tells me that if I want to write a book, that I'd be a fool not to write it without an editor. Makes sense. And I can't argue, none of us can argue with the collective knowledge of the internet, right? But that said, I do self-edit my own work to some extent. And I realize, like, even when I write these articles, like for TestProject, that I'm able to shift from the mindset of frantically putting words onto a page and rereading objectively in order to make those words make sense. We can look at spell checkers and grammar checkers as our static analysis tools for writing, but I can do pretty well on my own. And it gets even better. And where the compromise comes in, when think about applying this to product development, is we can all self-edit to some extent, and we'd all benefit from editing. I think that's unarguable. But on the other hand, in software, we have peer code review and often even data from customers to help us understand if we're building the right thing to solve problems. So those things tell me that maybe we can get somewhere with some peer review in writing. That would definitely get a higher quality. You're going to get the highest quality with an editor, but can we actually solve our customer problems and get our desired intent if we use peer review, which would be developers working together? Okay, let me put a pin in that and try another one. This is a page from my graduate thesis project. I have a master's degree in music composition. This is part of a 5-movement symphony I wrote practically a lifetime ago. So similar to writing, I self-edited my composition. But again, I never thought about this to put together this presentation, even when I wrote the article for TestProject. But I used a bank of synthesizers connected to my computer. Remember, this was 1993. I just gave away my age. So I could frequently play back what I was writing and make sure the notes on the page matched the ideas in my head. Like in software, that was a quick feedback loop. So I tell how things were sounding right away. That helped with editing because I could hear wrong notes. I go, oops, I wrote something down wrong. And then I could also take portions of this and get groups at the school, my music school, to play things back, where I could get additional feedback, in this case, on the composition itself, as well as the playability for the instruments. I will, full disclosure, I never won a Grammy for any of my compositions. They weren't bad. In fact, some won some minor awards, but with music, which is, arguably a worse analogy than writing, I realized that I shifted constantly between creating and evaluating or critiquing my work. It was part of what was expected for me to do. Going back to expectations and permission, if I thought my job was to write the music and for someone else purely to tell me whether it was correct or not, that wouldn't have worked. But it was expected that as a composer, I would know how to analyze and critique both my own work and other people's compositions. And I had no idea I was going to get into the testing world. But when I studied composition, I was taught that I had to be both a creator and an evaluator of my work that was my expectation. And I had classes on both, on creation and analysis of work. So again, parallels, hopefully these kick off some things to draw your own conclusions. Let's get back to testing and developing. So I have to ask, why do we put so much emphasis on separating the development activity and the testing activity? And I came from this world, and which was normal for a lot of my career and still normal in a lot of places. I think that separation and on reflection was right for the time and the period and style of software delivery. My experiences tell me that the separation can cause problems. Those are my recent experiences. And the back and forth, as I mentioned before, between developers and testers can cause a delay. When that back and forth is enforced by organizational structure, it certainly causes delay. I would be surprised to hear any or observe anything converse to that. For some of you, there's history, stagnation, and inertia. That will mean that getting someone who is a developer of software to also test their software or test the software with others on their team to be a challenge. I recognize that. It's not like automatically you can say developer is going to do testing and we'll be in a brand new world, but that is a world we live in. So let's talk about what this means. And then I'll take a whole bunch of questions. There's some ideas to get started, not necessarily sequential or prioritized, but I think all will help. And again, this is the perfect opportunity, or a good opportunity at least, to remind you that I don't want you to take what I say and use it as a blueprint. In fact, I will have you apply that to any voice in the software world, whether it's testing, development, anybody. What we say is not a blueprint. You need to take what you've heard me say today and other people say, reflect, and figure out how it applies to you in your context. It reminds me, the first time I ever read a testing book, I thought, man, I know about testing now. I'm actually ready. And then I read another book and I thought, man, I have to think more now. And then when I read that third book and the fourth and the fifth and the 10th and the 20th is when I began to slowly form my own opinions about testing. Because I realized that if you read 3 books on testing, you're going to get 5 ideas on what testing is. So please context, reflect, apply it to yourself. I think you'll find some things that you can use. So number 1, which is a lot of people shake their head and go, nope, I'm out. Expect developers to do testing. This may be I acknowledge it may be the hardest things for some teams. A lot of developers may even think that they don't need to do testing, or they may think that unit testing is enough, or that testing is someone else's job. I've found that a big step for developers, or again, really for any knowledge worker, is to know what's expected of them. In my org, developers know they're responsible for testing. It's expected. We don't have dedicated testers. I work with an org of 450, maybe 500 engineers, and we have half a dozen people who function as quality coaches to help make sure they're doing the right testing or thinking about testing in the right ways. An important aspect of this, which leads to my second point, is that developers also need to know that they can and probably should ask for help when testing. A lot of developers have been told for so long that they don't have the mindset for testing and they believe it. Well, they're wrong. Anyone has the mindset for testing. They need some coaching and training. So given an expectation of testing, if they're left to their own devices, in my experience, developers, I use this phrase a lot when people above me in my org ask, how is our development team doing at testing? I tell them they do all the testing they know how to do. On one hand, that's great because they know they're responsible for testing and they do a lot of it. But how, unconscious incompetence or unknown unknowns or just lack of knowledge, they leave testing ideas out. And again, what I've noticed, and that's what they'll do by default, left to their own devices, you will get incomplete testing if you tell developers they need to do their own testing. but we can help them get better at testing. And even on teams that have dedicated testers, we can still help them get better at testing. And probably at least one of you, I realize in me saying that, well, they don't recognize that they need to do testing, what testing needs to do, are saying, aha, the tester mindset. And I think you can learn to do testing. It's not a mindset shift. It's just adding skills to your repertoire. Remember, testing is part of development. I've watched hundreds of, and one thing about working at Microsoft scale on those teams, and also even in an org that's growing at Unity, is that I've watched hundreds of developers learn to be really good testers. I've watched them learn to shift seamlessly between developing and testing. It takes time, it takes coaching, it takes help. And that's where maybe a good place to apply some of our skilled testing is not to do all of the testing for them, but to help them do better testing. Focusing on learning is part of this. I mentioned this before. In addition to expectations around helping developers test and an overall goal of building a learning organization supports everything we've talked about today. There's a Peter Senge book, no picture of the book, called The Fifth Discipline, which is just it's a book about systems thinking in the organization, developing learning organizations. And his work shows that orgs that focus on learning as the fifth discipline have a competitive advantage in knowledge work. There it is again, knowledge work. If you're focused on just delivering without a cultural emphasis on learning and improving, I found your customers will feel that pain. And then worth mentioning, although it seems to be in every talk on testing, is the whole team owns quality. And we hear people say that, but we still see teams where the tester on the team or the test specialist on the team does the vast majority of the testing. That is, in my experience, a delay. As those developers, the only way to have whole team quality is for the development team, the people writing the code, to own that vast majority of testing. Test specialists, I saw this in just last night in a LinkedIn conversation, because people are still talking about this mindset post and talk. They said that, and they're very close. They said that testers enable the team to deliver quicker and faster, or quickly and easier, faster, safer. I'm paraphrasing. The change I make to that is when I see a test team as an enabler, it reads to me like the team is unable to deliver without that test team or test specialist. I more like the tester or test specialist as the accelerator, meaning that the team can definitely ship with quality without that person, but they can ship with quality faster with that person helping them and coaching them on testing. Testing is not a cost center. I think done right, testing added to a product is a business value. And of course, I can plug the modern testing principles on moderntesting.org. You read more about those. But when you have a test team that's responsible for quality or responsible for all the testing, it's slowing your team down, plain and simple. So again, I'm just mainly trying to plant a lot of seeds, and I see a lot of questions have come in, so we'll take care of those. But the takeaway I want you to take from the article I wrote on this talk today is that testing and development aren't as far apart as you think they are. Again, based on my experiences and my reflections, they're intertwined activities for reasons that probably aren't true anymore, at least in my world. Those specialties have been separated too much. We need to merge them back together because, again, it is not a monumental task to switch between development and testing, because they're the same thing. It's two sides of the same coin. We just need to practice shifting, and we can help teams. With our experience, we can help teams begin to shift faster and faster and help our teams ship higher quality software faster, which is guaranteed good for your business. So with that, I'll put up my, again, I want to thank TestProject again for giving me a platform today to babble. You're welcome to follow me on Twitter, there's my tag, or A/B Testing Podcast on all of your favorite places, podcast places. But I think with that, it may be good for me to stop and answer a whole bunch of questions and see where we get from there. So Karen, do you want me to just kind of walk through the questions and answers in the list, or do you want to ask me specific questions from that? How should we proceed from here?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for this great session from you. I especially love the part where you took the analogy of your experience from composing music. That's pretty cool to see, and the fact that you didn't even start from testing originally. That's very interesting. So it's cool, and I see a lot of questions here from the audience, and I guess what would be best is maybe you can look through the Q&A section or the chat and pick a couple of questions. And if someone also maybe after those wants to raise their hand, maybe we can even open it to a live discussion. What do you prefer?
Let me do a few, and you can just say, hey, I have a good question. If somebody has their hand up, we'll take the live one. Yeah. And maybe what we can do is maybe for questions I don't get to, because there's a lot, yeah. I can write out answers. We could do like a little Q&A on the blog, maybe.
Yeah, I love that. That would be cool.
Karen and I will figure it out. So the good news is I'm going to answer a bunch of questions. I'll take the live ones because they're fun. I'm going to do a handful of the Q&As from here first, but I will answer all of your questions at some point.
Yeah, sounds
That's my
cool.
commitment.
I also opened a forum thread that just in case we don't manage to address everything, then we'll
given the rate they're coming in, we're not, and I will answer questions there as well.
Yeah, so I guess we'll continue. We can always just continue the discussion over on that thread, and also maybe do a Q&A blog for the test project blog could be super interesting. And yeah, I guess it would be interesting maybe taking some of the live questions from people raising their hands and try to answer a couple of the Q&A ones. And yeah.
Okay, so let me do a small handful of the people that have typed things in because they're here. And I don't know how they're sorted. I'm just going to pick the, I'm not going to take time to read them closely. So Marion Almeida, I'm going to answer your question. So the question is, what's the opinion about the natural tendencies to not truly see mistakes, defects in what you build on your own? There's a thing, I don't even know if I want to mention it, but some people talk about critical distance. Like I'm too close to this to see the errors. And there's some truth to that. If you are the single developer and tester for your own stuff, that is difficult. But what I think the antidote for that is we don't, I hope not, I hope we, as developers, we're not writing code and then delivering it straight to production. We're getting peer code review, which helps. And what I've seen in all the teams I work with, maybe worth calling out, is in that peer code review, on teams that have had the right quality coaching and I almost said mindset there, confused everything, but the right quality coaching and practices there, that those peer code reviews ask questions about testing and tests and how will you know this work. And that often expands into the monitoring and alerting. And remember that sufficiently advanced monitoring is equivalent to testing. So all those things come out in that peer code review, and we have safe deployment methodologies to make sure that we are getting the feedback we need from customers to make sure we've done the right thing. So it is difficult, Marion, when if it's just you and you're the only one evaluating, but that's not the way most software teams learn. So that's how you avoid that. You work on a team and you work on helping each other be more successful. And I've done that one. Now I know how this works. And then Wilson Jose, or Jose Wilson, asks, is everything can be done by one person? Which is kind of the same question. And he says, we are separating only because it makes it easy to control and accelerate by collaboration. So I think it's the exact same answer. And if not, Wilson can raise his hand, or Jose if it's backward, and let me know. But I think that's the same answer. Let me do maybe one or two more, and then I'll get to the variety of hands being raised. I'm just going to pick, maybe I can answer all of Bhagya's question at once. I haven't read them yet, but I know he has 3. Okay, ideal mistake done by developers most of the time. And this is a good one because they're learning to do automation. They tend to sometimes over automate and write a bunch of tests to do the same thing, which is a thing I've seen new testers do back in the day a lot. So they don't think about test design before they write a bunch of automation. So that one tends to happen the most often. And this is where just a quick question on system thinking. What's your goal here? What are you trying to accomplish? Often helps out. Oh, and the parallel question, what's the ideal mistake done by testers? Well, it depends. If they're responsible for automation, kind of the same thing. But let me think a second. I mean, it depends on the team and the culture. As I mentioned before, I've seen testers, a big mistake is equating testing and quality. And maybe one to answer both of those that I've seen a lot is it should resonate with a lot of people. A assumption that quality and code coverage somehow are intertwined. Code coverage is a wonderful tool and a horrible metric. It can tell you what's untested, but says nothing about the code that's been covered. So that's probably the one I've seen both testers and developers make most of the time. And then last one, which is great. How many times does dev and tester fight in Microsoft? Answers the next level. And not really ever. Even early on, when often on the test team, we were, as testers, responsible for signing off on the project and we could theoretically block release. We never did because, again, a different world when shipping yearly was considered fast in those early days. But there was never really a fight. There were arguments. I remember, I wrote an article about this once, at a time, a customer reported a bug after we shipped and our dev manager came to yell at me. And I was able to diffuse that. And the challenge there was not that he didn't think we were doing our job. The challenge was we didn't communicate risk as well as we should have. So I learned from that. But it wasn't really, there was definitely a balance between the two, but it was never really a fight. But fun question. Okay, I'll come back to these in a second, but let me take a live one. Karen, if you want to unmute someone to put me on the spot.
Yeah, that would be cool. I see Biswajit is raising his or her hand. I hope I didn't butcher that name. So I am unmuting you. I hope you are able to talk now.
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
All right. Thank you. I did not realize that you will pick me. Okay. But anyway.
You shouldn't have put your hand up. You're on the spot.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. But it's fascinating discussion and very thought-provoking. I have two, basically one question, but they are more on a strategic approach. So how or what are your advice on bringing development and testing leadership coming to a point on sharing the responsibility of quality and how they can influence their team to get that feeling of not stepping on each other's toe, rather have a common goal. And then second thing is on the testing areas, there has been several years on testing mentality and playing the role of a law enforcement of quality. From that to how can a testing practice or leadership can change their mind or approaches to being more quality coach.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I think I'll try not to babble too long. They have similar answers. So one thing I didn't bring up earlier, so again, this is a great question because it reminds me of something I could have mentioned earlier, is that getting that knowledge sharing between development and testing. This is why the separate teams, especially when they're in separate locations or outsourcing, they don't work. Because one of the best ways, in addition to coaching, I've been able to get developers to think about quality and get testers to understand more about the product they're testing is to pair on it. We do a lot of pairing one of our coaches, or back when I managed test teams, even pairing a tester with the developer to work on testing something together, did a lot to help get the two roles, if you have them, to work together and understand what they were doing. And the story I tell a lot is what I had a lot of teams do, and should work for all of you, is if a developer comes to you and asks you to test something for them, ask them what they tested already. And regardless of that answer, ask them to pair on testing some more. So if the answer is nothing, okay, let's start and see where we're at. And they're going to get feedback, and they're going to, people generally want to be efficient. So they're going to eventually learn to do some of that testing for themselves. And eventually they'll come to you and say, hey, I need some help testing this. Notice they're asking for help. And you can ask them again, what have you tested already? And they say, well, I've done A and B. Okay, what about C? Oh, I haven't tried that. Okay, let's do that together. And eventually they get to a point where a developer says, hey, I've done this. I've tested A, B, C, D, and E. Do you have more things you think I should test? I go, no, it sounds good. Check it in. And what's happened during that pairing, of course, in my example, I emphasize the fact that developers were learning to test their own stuff. But again, in pairing and asking questions directly as the product is being tested about how things work, testers get a lot more understanding of not only the problem that particular feature or product is solving, but in the implementation of how it's done to come up with other ideas. So that handles the first one. And the second question is, really, should test be the test police, and how do you get past that, or the test gatekeepers? And or it isn't should, but how do you get past that? And pairing helps with that, but also just a lot of communication, just a lot of, when we do pairing, we're sharing your quality reports. I have my development team, for example, they create test plans, and they create them before they even do the development work. In fact, they've learned that those test plans are necessary in order for them to give a good estimate on when they're going to deliver. So doing those sorts of things and then communicating with leadership on what's happening, because in the end, they don't care about development and testing. They care about delivering a quality product to their customers. And in the absence of information, people will make things up, or as Michael Lopp likes to put it, in the absence of information, people will assume the worst possible version of the truth. So if you want to get alignment, where areas where there is typically not alignment between developing and testing, the best thing you can do is over communicate on what's happening with each of those teams to help deliver a product that customers love.
Thank you
hopefully
so much.
That answered your question. So thanks for asking.
Yes,
It reminded me of things I forgot to bring up, so that's great.
Oh, my pleasure. And possibly I have some follow-up questions, but I may take that offline sometime.
Okay, yeah, I will. This is something I've hopefully it's become clear on this this webinar that I've thought about and reflected on a lot. So I will answer your questions, especially if you want clarification, great, but things that may challenge what I've learned, like from your experiences, I'm happy to think about those as well. I'll take all the questions seriously. Do you want to do another live one, Karen?
Yeah. Next up, let's take one from Christina Nestor. So I am opening your mic. I hope.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Hi.
Hey, Alan. Thank
Hi.
you for this insightful talk that you are giving us.
My pleasure.
Alan, you were mentioning during the talk that you have a strong belief that there is a difference between QA and testing. Would you please expand on that and kind of touch on the key differences that you consider it important for people to know?
Yeah, and it wasn't QA, it was quality and testing.
Okay.
So of course, QA and testing have become synonymous, for better or for worse, in describing what people do. But testing and quality, like I care a lot about quality. I don't care as much about testing. I care about quality in the end. Testing is an activity we do to identify risk in the project, but quality is what the customer perceives as how well the product solves the problem it's set out to solve. So if I were to put on in the old days on a box of software, this page on the website, that we ran 10,000 tests and had 98% code coverage, customers aren't going to read that and go, wow, this must be a high quality project. They don't care about the testing. They care about whether it solves their problem in a way they enjoy. That's quality. Only the customer can actually tell you whether you've built a quality product. But what we do with the testing activity is we use that as an investigation to determine where there's risk and then to mitigate that risk. So that activity is a means to an end. Does that clarify that for you?
Yeah, and how do you measure quality then from the perspective of the final user, the customer?
When you're doing, that's a good question, because measuring quality is a super loaded question that if I were to ask 5 different people here, I would get 9 different answers. But in general, if it's easier if it's a back-end service that the customer doesn't interact with directly, because we can tell via customer usage whether that service is solving the problems we think they're going to solve through analytics. In the case of a product, we have to go by, the measurements are all lagging indicators. We can look at, and which we have mitigations for, but we can look at, we can do sentiment analysis of posts in forums or on Reddit, but more directly, we can get customer satisfaction surveys or volume of calls and support about that project. But in the end, we want to mitigate those lagging indicators by, that's why we do for large, like customer-facing projects, we do small releases to get feedback, incremental delivery, so we can get feedback to make sure we're building the right thing as we go along. But measuring quality is a super hard thing. Customers will tell you whether it's quality or not.
And if I understand you correctly, a lot of the metrics should be coming from business side, not so much, the typical metrics that we use in testing, but, number of pass, fail, and things like that, but mostly based on customer feedback and business metrics.
Yeah, and even and one good model for this is, Brian Merritt came up with the testing quadrants many, many years ago, and Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory expanded on those extensively in their agile testing books. But you have engineering facing metrics, which are test results and code coverage, et cetera. But you need customer facing metrics as well. So they play off of each other. You need to have both. But the quality of your engineering, the quality of your code is not necessarily it influences, but it is not the same as the quality of product for your customers.
Interesting. Excellent. Thank you very much, Alan.
No, thanks for asking.
Thank you, Christina. Let's take another live one. Are you up for it?
Yeah, bring them on.
Cool.
Nobody's yelled at me yet. That wasn't a challenge. That wasn't a challenge.
Lalit Kumar, I hope I'm saying that right.
Alan, can I yell at you?
Yes, go for it. I knew it was gonna happen.
No, honestly, I changed my questions at least 10 times throughout the discussion. So because I guess I would rather have another discussion with you, because coincidentally we are discussing and talking about the same topic, and I'm trying to address similar challenge through my own philosophy and methodology. I would like to know from you, because you recently mentioned about product quality and engineering quality. Do you believe that we need to have a fine balance between this craftsmanship spirit and optimum utilization of our engineering powers to deliver a product that customers would also appreciate in terms of quality? At the same time, it stands up to the scrutiny of engineering quality, so to say. And how do we then translate this to the practices we are discussing?
So, right, good question. I mean, software delivery is a balance. So you've answered your question a little bit. Yeah, you have to balance those things. But if you look at what Brent and I talk about in Modern Testing Principles, which where some of this obviously comes from, a lot of it is stolen blatantly from the Eric Ries Lean Startup book. Not because the book is great. The book, again, I mean, we've all experienced this. You read a book and you nod your head because, yeah, I'm already seeing this and someone's written about it and it's great. What we learned from Agile and Lean is that we need to balance the scrutiny of doing good development. And that's how we have continuous integration with analysis tools and testing we need to run and put our rigor into the engineering. But the way we balance that with customer quality is through frequent and incremental releases of our product in order to get feedback. And that can be to a small group of users, to a large group of users. But the Eric Ries quote is, you don't get value from your engineering effort until it's in the hands of customers. So the way we balance those things is find a way to apply all the scrutiny. And we run a lot of static analysis. We run a lot of automated tests. We do a lot of really good peer code review, but it isn't until we deploy that thing for a customer. And again, it's very easy if it's a back-end web service because we deploy those hundreds of times a day. For some of our web front ends or an SDK that has to be installed in an application on a device, that feedback loop is slower. But delivering small chunks and getting feedback on those either directly through customers or through some analytics or through usage, and doing that as frequently as possible to get that feedback is how we balance that engineering scrutiny with the craftsmanship that goes with building high quality software.
But sorry, I have a follow-up question. So
Sure.
then coming back to this mindset thing that you firmly believe is more of a myth, I'm struggling to figure out, in the absence of this mindset or the notion of it, how do we really ensure that the craftsmanship is there, protected and developed?
I'm struggling a little bit to figure out how those relate. So I'll ask this question, this clarifying question. What's the outcome of craftsmanship? What does that do for the product? I'm not arguing against craftsmanship. I just want to get clear on what that does for our product.
Well, for product, I guess it improves the quality of it in its finest form, though we see that or believe that it's in the end decided by customer. But if we have millions of customers, we could still have a wide range of quality that is acceptable and expected. And again, isn't it also that it depends on the size of the organization, the customer base they have, their risk appetite. If I'm a new company building a software for the first time, launching in the market, I believe the expectation of fine quality would be so higher if I'm to sustain and beat the competition. So here probably my emphasis on craftsmanship would be higher as compared to engineering practices, so to say.
Yeah, I could see that. So, my translation of that, going back to my initial statement, is in order for you to deliver incrementally and quickly, you can't do that on top of a messy code base. So that craftsmanship for that word has to be built in order for you to grow and sustain your business. It is tough shipping a product built on top of a house of cards. So if you want to remain competitive, you absolutely have to have a level of quality in the code and some care. Another book plug, a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is all about the philosophy of quality, but I'll sum it up for you in one sentence. Quality and care are two sides of the same coin. And this is true in software, it's true in motorcycles, it's true in anything else. The care put into it does have an impact on the quality of that for customers. So they're intertwined in that way, but it's also possible to it's a balance. It goes back to your first question. It's a balance, because if all we emphasize is make sure that this is just built perfectly and it's a fine-tuned bit of software that never gets to customers, they never realize the value from that, and our company
Mhm,
goes out of
mhm.
business. And we've seen examples of that. Like, how many of you, other than me, have sponsored a Kickstarter, which looked so cool? And it's like, yes, someone needs to build this, and they're putting so much work into this, but it never ships because they're unable to get past the design and ideation phase into actually making something customers can use.
Mhm.
All right, does that help?
Yeah, I got you. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Karen, I can keep going if you want. I can take some from the, whatever you want to do. Just boss me around, tell me what to do.
Well, maybe let's take some of a couple more from the Q&A section, and I don't know if I don't see any raised hands at the moment.
Okay.
So maybe after that, I mean, whatever is left, we can put it into an article or continue the discussion over on the forum. Depends on how you feel.
Okay, I can do a few here. I see they're sorted by thumbs up there, so I'll do some of these twos.
Yeah,
at
let's
the
do
top.
those. The thumbs up one. Sounds good.
So Dimitri, I think you're asking, is how about the opposite, like starting with testing and switching to peer development and coding? I'm guessing, and shove something in chat if I'm wrong while I talk here, but you're talking about like career-wise, like starting with, we're talking about like activity-wise, starting with testing. I think I'm gonna guess the way it's phrased, Dimitri, is that starting with a testing career and then switching to development and coding. I've done that. My career started in, well, eventually in testing, and I was a software developer for a while, and then I kind of fell into the tools and infrastructure world, and that's kind of where I'm at now. But I think that works, and I can clarify that if needed. But then the other question from Dimitri was, what do you think about the new DevOps and recently coming the hype word test ops? People have forgotten, and this is a soapbox unrelated to the topic today, but worth standing on, is that DevOps was never meant to be a discipline. It was never meant to be like, I see posts sometimes, people going, hey, we're moving from agile to DevOps. I'm like, WTF? DevOps was a term coined, I believe, by Jez Humble and Gene Kim, but don't quote me on that. It was meant to describe a culture where code was thrown over the wall by a development and test team to an operations team who were then responsible for deploying and maintaining that code. It sounds a lot like where testing was 5 to 10 years before then, or it may still be in some places. So it was never meant to be anything other than a culture. And then eventually we started building Devops teams, which, full disclaimer, I manage one at Unity, a large one. We do all of the infrastructure and tools for all services at Unity. But we're there to not enable, we're there to accelerate, just like testing, accelerate teams' ability to deliver easier, faster, and safer. And I think with test ops, it's like making sure testing is part of that, but my opinion is that DevOps always included that. My team focuses on accelerating easier, faster, safer. And we do that by, well, I don't have to describe DevOps to you and all the tools we use, but I can say that in managing DevOps and also program management at Unity, I have more control over the quality of our products than I ever did, even managing teams of hundreds of testers at Microsoft. So that's my opinion. My opinion is test ops, SecOps, dev test SecOps. They're all just concepts. Talk about breaking down the walls between disciplines, which what I talked about today. So it does loop back in, because all of these ops terms that are coming up as buzzwords, they're all around getting rid of the lines between specialties. John, I'm going to answer your question, and then I'll have Karen tell me what to do. Self-taught tester of over 8 years, just started a new company where they didn't have a tester. Congratulations. My plans for how to introduce them to the idea is essentially what you've written here. Get developers to do the happy path testing. I'm currently using my testing knowledge to improve UI UX, as well as trying to break things in a way the happy path would not suggest. That said, that is a statement and not a question, but I'm going to turn it into a question and just say, the next steps are, developers are, that's one of the mistakes to tie into an earlier question that developers make is they test for that happy path. They go, okay, we're ready to go. And one of the best things, the best coaching questions you can ask is, and coaching, the difference between coaching and consulting is telling them what to do. Coaching, I like to think, is getting them to think about what they should do or changing their behavior versus their activity. And I ask them all the time 2 questions. The first one is, what are the ways that this may not work? Oh, good question. It just opens up a whole avenue of thinking for them that, talk about that mindset shift. Sometimes that shift is just getting them to think about that one question. It's not a mindset shift. It's just opening up their mind to more of what software delivery is. The other question I ask is, how will you know customers are being successful here? And that's how I get them to add the correct analytics and telemetry to their code to understand that. But I think roles for you, John, I think roles like what you're in are becoming more common. And again, I'm just describing what I'm already seeing, not what I think teams should do. But I think more and more we're going to see senior testers step into roles on teams that don't have a dedicated tester, and their role is primarily to help them do better testing on their own. And of course, I'm not saying testers shouldn't do testing. That would be dumb. There is some specialty there that helps, but I think helping and accelerating others in doing better testing is a great path. So cool. Thanks for the question, John. I'm glad that's working out for you. Maybe one more. I'm not going to wait for Karen to interrupt. So Victor asks, help the devs with testing would be also teaching them to do mock DB and unit testing, or is that to do on their side from the start? My opinion is they should, but how can I push that on their side? So the answer to any sufficiently complex question is it depends. I would, and again, I don't have the full context here. I would never say, okay, you need to do mocking. I like to start with the coaching questions versus the consulting, which is, what do you think we need to do in order to test this? And they may say, well, we need to put the data into the database and read it back. I say, well, that's slow. And we can do that in an end-to-end test, but should we use a mock? And I think most developers today would not ask what a mock is, but they could figure that out. But as far as getting them to, well, I think it's for them to do. So 2 answers to this question. One is, I think they'll get to do it by you asking those questions are, what do we need to do to verify this works? What are the ways in which this may not work? And you can lead them towards the right solution, which they should implement. That said, sometimes the right thing to do for us is to bootstrap whatever solution we need. I've done this in the past. I've written or wrapped some test automation harness, written a very bare bones set of automation that I've shared with the team. And this works, it's reliable, blah, blah, and they use that as a model to build more tests. In fact, my team right now is building, nobody builds anymore. We're adapting an open source API testing framework that we can use internally across all of our different SDKs. We'll bootstrap that work from my team of test coaches. They'll get that available, and then the dev team will take it over and snowball it from there. But sometimes that's the right thing to do, is to bootstrap some of those things for customers. Hopefully that answers your question, Victor. Karen, do we have another hand, or should I keep going?
I guess, not sure if Christina, it's the same hand from before. If it is, if it's not, then feel free to unmute yourself. I see.
No, it's actually a new question.
Oh.
From the whole conversation here, what I'm getting is that moving testing closer to coding is going to have tremendous benefits for the business. And I'm wondering, Alan, from your experience, how is the throughput of the development team affected by this shift in where this activity is being done? And the second one, if you have time, would be, how is the time to market affected by this?
Okay, great questions. And and Justin asked a very similar question in chat that I'm gonna mark here as well. What if you're in a company where developers don't see the value of coded testing, and more importantly, they think it just makes them slower to deliver? And what I've seen, and in addition to what I've seen, there are plenty of articles and case studies and experience reports, all with almost the same title, saying things like, you need to slow down to move fast. And this is what theory of constraints is about as well. In fact, this is exactly what theory of constraints is about. So I've given away the answer. The answer is, as developers do more testing, as that back and forth goes away, they deliver faster, even though they're doing, air quote, more work. It feels slower at first. And while there's learning happening in the first place, very quickly they get faster at delivering because they understand that back and forth has slowed them down, and getting rid of that, or vastly reducing the back and forth between different people on the team or different teams makes them faster. So the short answer is that developers owning more of testing, and I want to, actually, I'll put a pin in that for a second. Developers owning more of testing, in my experience, has helped them deliver faster, more quickly to customers. I do want to tie this back to the topic of the talk, which is not about developer. It's a little bit about developers doing more testing, but I want to fight the notion, because we talked a lot about that, but I want to fight the notion that developers are unable to do testing, which I brought up, that the mindset change is too difficult for people to address. I think the main thing, and it sounds like you've already all moved past this, is that developers are capable of testing. And once we acknowledge that developers are capable of testing, then perhaps we should help them do better testing, because that's going to affect the quality and the velocity of the product overall. So anyway, that's the long answer. The short answer is every single experience of mine shows that when we expect and give permission to developers to do their own testing, that velocity of the team on delivery and quality go up. Did I eventually answer your question in there?
Yes, and I I did not get into that a mindset. In my experience of well, approximately 17 years in this software development world, the best developers that I met, they were very good at testing their own code, and
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And what you could see is that they do have that deep care, what you mentioned, for not just him doing his work well, but also the customer, the final user. And that care, you could see it in how they write code, the quality of the code, and how they cared for not just him being able to read his own code, but also somebody else that can take on what was written. So it's definitely the what you are preaching here is it is what it means, quality, right? Deeply caring for what you do and for who is consuming your work.
Yep.
Fully agree. And I don't know if you still have time about my second question about time to market.
Yeah, that's the same thing. Time to market is faster as well. Again, that ties into the ability to deliver incrementally. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to answer fully another long question from the chat, but one other thing to call out is, my team at Unity in addition to DevOps, as I mentioned, and quality coaches, also program management, which we track, and that is actually agile coaching a lot in the program management side. But my team ensures that we can get our products to market very, very quickly. And even with the pandemic, we shipped across those 450 engineers over 400 customer impacting projects last year. And that's because we're worried about acceleration and making things easier, faster, and safer for our development teams. And safer means giving them the right skills and coaching they need to think about what testing they need and risk mitigation, but also the tools that our CI system, the tools that run in production to help monitor quality, all those things. So it all fits together. Is if you the more you break down the walls, and we focus today on testing and development, but the more you break down the walls between specialties, and if you go back to the theory of constraints, a pure specialist is a bottleneck by definition. So the more we break down those walls and apply some more generalization, the faster teams will deliver and the faster we get products to market. Okay, right. Karen, I think I have a heck of a blog post or a forum to go from here, which I'm happy to do. And then Dimitri, I missed your question on automation frameworks, but I promise I'll answer it somewhere, either wherever Karen tells me to. So either in the forum or in a blog post or both, but I will get all of the questions answered. I can commit to that.
Great, sounds perfect. And I can vouch for that. Alan is a man of his word. So again, first of all, Alan, thank you so very much for this wonderful session. A lot of people here are saying it was amazing and thought-provoking, which I think is very important, especially nowadays when there are so many opinions out there. It's really great hearing it from someone with such vast expertise as yourself. So really appreciate you taking the time to share with us your knowledge and address so many questions, putting you on the spot.
Always my pleasure.
And thank you everyone who attended for sharing such great questions. As Alan said, we will definitely make a post out of it on our blog. In the meantime, I guess until that would be ready and published, you can feel free to share your questions over on the forum link thread. I just shared it again. So feel free to do so and continue the discussion over there. And yeah, a full recording of this session will be sent to all of you in a couple of hours. We also had a cool mindset myth challenge over on LinkedIn. So we'll announce the winner over on our LinkedIn test project page. So definitely make sure to follow it and stay tuned for the winner over there. Yeah, and I guess that's it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Alan, very much for this. It was
Thank you for hosting me.
And stay safe out there, wherever you are. We'll see you next time.
All right, bye, everyone. Thanks for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.